Okay, so by now you have watched two videos over imaginary and complex numbers, and I just wanted to um, hit up some of the most important concepts. You saw the first video and we started out with this graph, and so he never really solved it. I just want to make sure that you see this solving right here and understand that the two zeros for y equals x squared plus 1 are going to be plus and minus I. Secondly, in the second video, you saw the pattern that imaginary numbers have, right? 1i, -1, -I. And then he showed you that the second column, when you start again, it's like, oh, 1i, -1, -I. And note, if we started our third column would start with what? I to the 8th. And then it'd be 1i, -1, -I. The next column would be I to the 12th. What do you think the next column would be? That's right, I to the 16th. And the next one, I to the 20th. We'd always start with a multiple of 4. And so what happens when we're looking at problems like, okay, I did not want that to happen. So let's go ahead. Um, let's say we're looking at i's that have really high numbers. How do we know where they fit in? And so if you think about it, when each new column starts with a multiple of 4, we know that if we divided 4 into a multiple of 4, we'd get the remainder of 0, which brings us back to I to the 0, which would be 1. If we look at something like I to the 5, if we divided 5 by 4, what would our remainder be? 4 goes into 5 once with a remainder of 1. The remainder tells us which one to look back on the original column. If the remainder is 1, then your answer is I. Same thing with 6, right? 4 goes into 6 one time with a remainder of 2. And that's what I'm showing you here in these. Let me see if I can get a little yellow going. That's what I'm showing you. The work right here, right, is showing you when you divide 4, we're looking at this remainder that you have left after you divide. And the remainder is going to tell you which I to look at in the original column. This is our original column here. All right, so let's look at these bigger numbers like I showed you a few seconds ago. So we have I to the 24th. We're going to go ahead and take 4 divided into 24, and we realize it goes in evenly, right? There's 0 remainder. And so that 0 reminds us that I'm looking right here. And so my answer is going to be 1. If I divide 4 into 35, 4 goes in 8 times, right? With 4 times 8 is 32. How many are left over? 3. Okay, so that means I'm going to be going over where the remainder is 3. Therefore, my answer is negative I. Same thing here. 4 goes into 401 100 times. What's the remainder? 1. Another way to think about it, if you don't want to do division, is just to see how far away is a number from a multiple of 4. So 24 is straight up a multiple of 4, so that's why we know, well, it's right on it, so therefore it's going to equal 1. 35, let's see, what's the closest multiple of 4 that's less than 35? 32 is a multiple of 4. 35 is 3 away from it, so it's going to match up with I to the 3, which is negative 1. Same thing with 400. What's the closest multiple of 4 that's below 401? 400. So this multiple, or I'm sorry, this number is 1 away from a multiple of 4, which means it's going to match up with I to the 1, which is I. So that's how I do it. Haha, I do it. And so it's really important that you just remember this this pattern. 1, I, -1, -I. 1, I, -1, -I. I also wanted to review a few other things fun with imaginary numbers. Things like this, you know, that have multiple parts to it. We want to first go ahead and deal with what we look at here, which is the square root of 9 is 3, square root of -1 is I, and then of course the negative comes last. So I want to just run through some things. Here, square root and square, they cancel out. It doesn't matter that there's a negative number underneath the square root. This answer would be -5. So we're just flying through some things. If I see square root of -3 raised to the 4, I can break it up into square root of -3 squared, square root of -3 squared. Square and square root cancel each other out. We get 9. There are other ways to do this problem. You can pause this video, do it however you want. Just make sure you're getting 9. And then here, of course, square root of -1 is I to the 5th is I. And then we've got where we have I squared is equal to negative 1, I to the fourth is equal to 1. We substitute those in. We get negative 9. And this is when I really wanted to make sure that you all understand. You're going to see these in WebAssign. So once again, I to the 20th, we can either divide or we can say, hey, what's the closest multiple of 4? Hey, 20 is a multiple of 4. It's right on it. There's no remainder. So we know that that's going to, let me switch to my cursor. That's going to mean that it matches up with I to the 0, which is 1. Remainder is 0. 17, you can either divide and see the remainder, or you can say, hey, multiple of 4 is 16. 17 is 1 away from that, which matches up to I to the 1, which is I. Or do the remainder, right? 43, either divide and do the remainder, or say, hey, the closest multiple that's less than 43 is 40. 43 is 3 away from that. It's going to match up with the I to the 3. Remainder of 3 is equal to negative I. Same thing with 34. The closest multiple of 34 is 32. 34 is 2 away from that, or divide and see your remainder is 2. And that matches up with I to the 2, which is negative 1. Put these all together and you're going to see 1 minus 1, well, that's 0. I minus I, that's 0. All our work and our answer is 0. Okay, those were the loose ends I wanted to tackle in this third video. Thanks for joining me.